What's this choking up my inbox? The nuclear-powered flying hotel.
You don't have to worry about Sky Cruise's carbon footprint. Its 20 electric engines are powered solely by clean nuclear energy.
No. Come on. I mean, seriously, no one could be this... What? 2 million hits on YouTube in a couple of weeks? Look, no. Come on. No one could possibly take this seriously.
All new at 6, you might soon be able to go on a Sky Cruise.
Giant nuclear-powered flying hotel.
It would house 5,000 guests. It would remain in the air for like several years.
आगे बढ़ते हैं हवा में हॉलिडे क्या आप चलेंगे?
Seriously, when I was a kid, I was watching spoof disaster movies about a nuclear-powered bus.
As you know, Cyclops is a nuclear-powered bus. Although there is practically no chance of a radiation leak, we have taken every precaution for your safety.
Designers say that they can cruise for months at a time if you wish.
The nuclear-powered bus could, of course, wash itself.
Let's take a closer look. It can hold up to 5,000 passengers, they say.
Had its own swimming pool and bowling alley.
We believe that Cyclops has truly broken the recreational barrier.
It features shopping malls, sports centers, swimming pools, restaurants, bars, playgrounds for children, theaters, and cinemas.
The people are calling it the new Titanic. I'm not on board with this, literally or figuratively.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Rochelle. I have a lot of questions. I mean, I think it's really cool. I would definitely go and tour it if it was on the ground.
There are going to be restaurants, movie theaters, shopping, a whole lot more on board.
Watch your feet.
We were kids and we all thought we'd be flying cars around right now. Well, it's something not even the Jetsons could dream up. A new CGI image shows off a giant nuclear-powered flying hotel.
The jewel of the B&L fleet, the Axiom. Spend your 5-year cruise in style, waited on 24 hours a day by our fully automated crew.
That could stay in the air for months at a time. It's part plane, part hotel, part shopping mall, gym, theater, you name it.
While your captain and autopilot chart a course for non-stop entertainment.
The hotel features a facility equipped with the latest medical technology, aimed to keep you safe.
Fine dining, and with our all-access hover chairs, even Grandma can join the fun.
It could carry 5,000 people on board, basically a cruise in the sky.
Saying it will be pilotless, so it's not going to have to deal with any of the labor shortage stories that we've been talking about so much here.
What? Of all the things that you find wrong with this, the one you go with is it's going to be pilotless so it won't be affected by a labor shortage. What?
So have you seen this video out there? It's this Sky Cruise. It's a futuristic hotel that obviously would be in the sky. In fact, this thing is humongous.
Oh, no, totally. But I don't see why Fox News is so impressed here. I saw this documentary over a decade ago now called The Avengers, and an organization called SHIELD, I think, which demonstrated some very impressive flying aircraft carriers. And they were closely followed by a British institution called UNIT, which had also independently developed their own flying aircraft carriers. And I'm surprised, given the in-depth research that Fox News did on this story, that they didn't cover those documentaries as well.
It would house 5,000 guests. It would remain in the air for like several years.
Wow, it looks like Fox News really missed out on a big scoop here, because almost a decade before I was born.
This is your flight. You're lucky. It's the maiden flight of the new atomic-powered Fireflash.
Powered by nuclear fusion, it would be steered by artificial intelligence, which...
Isn't that the new aircraft that flies 6 times the speed of sound? That's right. But don't worry. It's perfectly safe.
Supposedly be able to read everything, so it would avoid all the dangers in the sky.
Enough explosives to smash the atomic reactor.
I gotta be honest, I love the concept.
And for those who need closure on what happened to that nuclear-powered plane.
Sorry, Scott. We're not gonna make it. We're running out of runway.
Well, they called in international rescue.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Which was, bizarre enough, 2 other nuclear-powered aircraft. International rescue. Those were the days.
But I was a child during the Apollo program, and And I saw what until that point had been impossible, right? For a man to go to the moon.
Yes, that, and building a nuclear-powered bus.
Mankind has always dreamed of such concepts which empower us.
If there should be a radiation leak, God forbid, a protective device will automatically drop from the compartment immediately above your head. If you have not secured yourself properly, simply look for these telltale signs. Profuse bleeding of the gums, clumps of hair falling out, and intermittent blindness.
In such ways that authorities have actually needed to curb our dreams.
Oh, I see. So it's the government curbing our enthusiasm is the reason why we don't have nuclear-powered buses and planes.
For instance, the ancient Greeks, they created the myths, like Icarus flying too close to the sun. I got to tell you, I've got 2 statues of Icarus in my house. I use them as inspiration.
Yes, kids, this guy covers business stuff on Fox News, along with the banner that mankind has always dreamed of empowering concepts and authorities seek to curb such dreams.
Now, the only thing I'm worried about is this becoming part of a SPAC and being offered sometime this year, right?
Nah. That's just not enough. Let's try.
The only thing I'm worried about is this becoming part of a SPAC and being offered sometime this year, right? Listen, I salute the folks that really think out of the box. They put no limits on what we can do. They put no limits on where we can go as people. That's how we got to this point. This is why I'm speaking to you right now, whether it's on your TV, whether it's on your phone, whether it's in the sky. We can make it all happen. Now, I know it's a little intimidating, a little scary, but the main point here is we never want to stop dreaming about making the impossible possible, because that is the essence of mankind, particularly in this country.
Why do I suddenly get the feeling that this guy's bought an awful lot of bridges in his time?
Of course, the naysayers are having a field day with this, pointing to issues from maintenance to getting this damn beast off the ground to whatever happens to that nuclear power source if it crashes.
Yeah, and all those really annoying little nitpicks, like, why it's fundamentally impossible. Let's get into it. Now, for a long time, it's been known that if you actually want to make something big and get it off the ground, one of the best ways of doing that is to do it from the water, because it's a big, sort of fairly flat place, plus you get a lot of ground effect. I mean, really, just think about it. You've got basically the entire weight of a building. There's pretty much zero chance that you're going to get it to run down a runway on wheels. Sea, on the other hand, you might be in with a chance. And this was the origin of the Caspian Sea Monster, essentially a sea-skimming plane. It's the ground effect. You get an extra compression from being near the ground, which gives you extra lift. Similarly with the Spruce Goose, which until recently was the largest wingspan plane ever built. Built entirely out of wood, I should mention, and designed to carry 2 Sherman tanks weighing about 30 tons apiece. This was a sort of proposal for World War II transport. So all in, this giant plane could carry about 60 tons. Now, those numbers aren't that different from modern times. Your typical plane is divided roughly into thirds. A third of the weight is the actual plane, a third of the weight is its cargo, and a third is fuel. So if we take a Boeing 777 as a benchmark example, it weighs about 250 tons. So a little more than a third of it is the actual plane. It's about half of the mass of that 250 tons. 120 odd tons of that are the plane. And then the rest you can fill up with fuel or cargo. So, in a typical configuration, it'll be like 50-50 or something. So that's about 60 tons of fuel, 60 tons of cargo. Again, not that different to the Spruce Goose. Now, most people look at roads and think they've got to be indestructible. But no, they actually have maximum operating weights. So in the US, for freeways, it's about 40 tons is your maximum vehicle weight, with about 10 tons per axle, because if you get things heavier than that, you get disproportionate damage to the roads. Now, if you take your typical plane, again, we'll go for the 777 as a benchmark, when it takes off, when it's at its most heavy, most of that weight is carried on 12 wheels, on 6 axles, which, 240 tons, 6 axles, is about 40 tons per axle. But at some point, you keep on adding weight to those axles, the thing will just sink into the runway like it was mud. So let's get an estimate of how much this plane would actually weigh. Yeah, well, I've got it here with other planes for perspective, so we can see it's about 5 times the length of a regular plane and maybe, I don't know, 20 times the diameter or something. So its volume will be 20 times 20 times 5. It'll be about 2,000 times the volume of a regular plane. And given that regular planes are some 250 tons, that sort of thing, which gives the plane a mass of some 500,000 tons. And for perspective, a large aircraft carrier, a supercarrier, will only weigh something like 100,000 tons. In fact, we have planes here for scale, so we know they're about 70 meters long, and nuclear aircraft carriers are about 300 meters long, so about 4 times the length of one of these planes. So we can put a nuclear aircraft carrier right next to this thing on the same scale. Anyway, so where are we at? 500,000 tons on, what have they got? 3 sets of 5 axles. That puts it at 33,000 tons per axle. And this is before we get onto the obvious stuff, like, what the hell's going on with that back set of wheels there? Yeah, that's not going to work. Anyway, 500,000 tons, 15 axles. Give or take, each one of these axles has to take the weight of a decent-sized battleship. Decent-sized battleships clocking in at 30, 40,000 tons, that sort of thing. Basically, this thing would just sink straight into the ground on those wheels, because it's applying forces to the ground similar to those of a pneumatic hammer. And this is before we get on to the second problem, powering all of this with nuclear reactors. Now, it may surprise precisely no one that this isn't actually a new idea. If you go into the middle of nowhere in Idaho, you'll find this strange brick-shaped building in the absolute middle of the desert, middle of nowhere.
Okay, these are the Great Plains out back of Idaho Falls. These are the Great Idaho Plains. And the reckoning is these were caused by the supervolcano hotspot that now sits on the Yellowstone. And no one lives out here at all, apart from the odd dirt farmer.
It's called EBR-1, which stands for Experimental Breeder Reactor 1.
No, a tiny little brick shack in the middle of the Idaho Plains. The world's first nuclear reactor.
Now, if you ever find yourself in the middle of the Idaho desert at EBR-1, which is actually open to the public and is actually quite a fun place to visit, you'll notice 2 rather peculiar looking structures in the parking lot.
One of the reasons why I came down here. After they had got nuclear weapons technology working, but before they'd got the rockets capable of delivering them to other countries, they came up with this idea of a nuclear-powered bomber. And these are, that's the heat engine, and this was the actual reactor. And they were going to put this inside a plane which was going to fly around almost indefinitely. Okay, this is stuff I didn't know, because the plane was going to be so radioactive by the time it had flown around for a bit. They had a lead-shielded locomotive running on 4 tracks to tow the plane to its hangar, and they actually built some gigantic hangar in the desert 30 miles north of here. There you go, 120-hour flights, 5-day menu for the crew. Crazy, eh?
You see, back in the World War II days, people worked out that it was a damn sight easier to destroy enemy aircraft when they were just sat on the ground rather than trying to shoot them down in the air, where people might try and avoid being shot down, or even worse, shoot you down. Later, there were long-range bombers that came along, which would need rather long runways. And so, if you could blow up their runway, then you could immediately neutralize the threat of all of their long-range nuclear bombers. So to counter this, you would need nuclear-armed planes in the air at all times, or planes idling at the end of the runway with nuclear weapons. And it goes without saying that all of this was before accurate intercontinental ballistic missiles were a thing. It was also the central theme of a gazillion Cold War movies.
The most powerful enemy can be defeated only by the utmost effort and by seizing every opportunity. Lenin said that, sir.
Colonel, tell us, what would you do about the Soviet bombers?
Recalling our bombers won't stop them, sir. We have thousands of commercial jets. We can ram their bombers.
They have over 300 bombers, and what about their ICBMs?
You take out these red dots, there won't be anyone left to fire the ICBMs. The best defense, cut off the head of the Soviet chicken.
We were to immediately launch an all-out and coordinated attack on all their airfields and missile bases. We'd stand a damn good chance of catching them with their pants down. We would therefore prevail and suffer only modest and acceptable civilian casualties from the remaining force, which would be badly damaged and uncoordinated. Choose between two admittedly regrettable but nevertheless distinguishable post-war environments. One where you got 20 million people killed and the other where you got 150 million people killed. I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
Now, one of the things to be considered at the time, when there really were binders titled World Targets in Megadeaths, that's not a spoof there in the hands of generals. Megadeath. Good name for a band. Now, ultimately, what sealed the deal here was accurate ICBMs, which could be launched in minutes, which again led to another string of Cold War movies.
They take about 30 minutes to reach their target. So do theirs, right?
6 up.
There's no way you can win that game.
I know that. It doesn't. It hasn't learned.
10, it's got the code, it's going to launch.
Strange game. The only winning mode is not to play.
But that fundamentally made the nuclear bomber redundant. But even if it hadn't, the project would have died anyway. You see, nuclear reactors put off a lot of high-energy particles, radiation. Quite nasty stuff to organic life, to the point where to put someone next to an active nuclear core, you will get a fatal radiation dose in seconds. So there are only two things that can stop this. Number one is distance. You know, if you get further away from, say, for instance, the sun, you don't get as much energy from it. So you could actually quite happily run a core out in the open in the middle of the desert with no ill effects, because basically the distance solves all your problems. Incidentally, fairly close to EBR-1, which of course was built back in the post-World War II days, so it had to be all in the middle of nowhere, and they had to get the specialized personnel out there, is a place called Atomic City. And if you take a look right next to Atomic City, you'll notice these strange circles out in the middle of the desert. So what do you think caused those? Leave your comments below and we'll see if you are right at the end of the video. The second way you can reduce the radiation is by shielding. And to a good approximation, a kilo of mass, no matter if it's lead or water or air, all provide the same amount of radiation shielding. And if you're wondering how I could possibly know such wizardry, I've actually worked in 3 research reactors in my time.
Background's about 0.2, so we're about twice background here. And if you think that's bad, right, so I'm now within, oh, good grief, 8 meters of the core, something like that, and I'm only at twice background. If you think this is bad, when you get an airline, this will go up to about 2, 3 sort of thing. But in reality, gammas can be stopped by electrons, and the heavier your nuclei, the more electrons you get. So basically it scales with mass. The more mass you have, the better your X-ray screening. So your typical piece of X-ray screening looks like that, big piece of concrete. In fact, from the reactor core here, just a couple of meters of water will screen most of the X-rays.
People classically use lead, of course, because lead is relatively small for a kilo, and it's fairly cheap. But here's the kicker. You have people on this plane, so yeah, can't really make them very distant from where the nuclear reactor is. Your pilots are by definition going to be very close to the screamingly radioactive core. But yeah, I can't put a lot of shielding on it either, because shielding is heavy. So on the plus side, you get a plane that can effectively fly forever, but it's also quite good at irradiating pilots and crew. And due to lack of enthusiasm for this trade-off, the project was cancelled. There were also other concerns, like stuff, no matter how well designed, especially complex stuff, has a habit of going wrong, and the prospect of having a nuclear bomber with a nuclear reactor on board flying around perpetually, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. With maybe thought-provoking allegories about keeping a cocked loaded gun in your own home. Or maybe not, whatever. Something about the inherent dangers of nuclear-armed bombers permanently in the air. Or giant stockpiles of nuclear-armed missiles. Anyway, due to the obvious shortcomings, people decided that the nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed bomber permanently flying around irradiating the pilots when there were, well, let's not go with smart, but less stupid options available, led to the cancellation of the nuclear bomber. They did, however, get as far with this project as building the nuclear reactor and heat engine to power the bomber, and they actually got as far as running this thing. And now it's sat there in the parking lot of EBR-1. So yeah, in principle, nuclear-powered planes, not a new idea. But this is in a different league altogether. I mean, let's just think about the power consumption here for a second, shall we? Look, our typical plane will burn, whatever, say 100 tons of fuel. We came across this earlier, over a 10-hour flight or something. So it's give or take 10 tons of fuel per hour, or 3 kilograms of fuel per second. With each kilogram of fuel packing about 50 million joules, 50 megajoules, that means that this plane is using 150 megajoules per second, or its power is 150 megawatts. That's just for your typical airliner, Boeing 777, that sort of thing. Or looked at another way, cars run at about 0.1 megawatts. So give or take, planes carry about 1,000 times as many people and run at about 1,000 times the power, which means that planes get comparable miles per gallon or kilometers per liter per person as a car. Cool. Now, believe it or not, it takes almost the same amount of power to run a nuclear aircraft carrier as a single jet airliner. So our jet airliners run at about 150 megawatts. Nimitz-class carriers can output a power of about 200 megawatts. Whatever, it's very similar ballpark numbers. So a nuclear aircraft power plant will just about power a commercial airliner. So hang on, what did we say this thing was? It was roughly about 2,000 times the mass of a typical jet. So ballpark figures, you're going to need about 2,000 times the energy to keep this thing aloft. So that's 2,000 nuclear aircraft carrier power plants would be needed to keep this thing aloft. Or if we ditch the whole nuclear aircraft carrier thing and go for full-size nuclear reactors, well, those things don't clock in at 200 megawatts, but more like 6,000 megawatts. You would still need 30 of them to power this thing. That's not far off every nuclear power station in America. And just nailing the lid on any semblance that mankind isn't on a march down to idiocracy, we have this crap featured on Charles Payne's Making Money.
Oh, I like money.
Along with the incredibly well thought out message of how this nuclear powered plane shows how people always dreamed of empowering concepts, but government tries to curb those dreams without quite realizing that nuclear powered planes were a dream of the US government. Which brings us on to who wants closure about those strange circles in the desert. Maybe some sort of UFO landing site or something. And then you sort of scroll out a bit and just come down and you realize, no, it's just irrigation circles. And you can sort of see where, people have not watered as much recently, and you come up to Atomic City and you see what they're like when you've not watered for a long time. And that's today's video. If you enjoyed it, drop a thumbs up on it and maybe consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on more great videos like this. And as ever, if you really like the work of this channel and want to support it directly, you can do it through Patreon. And thanks for watching.